Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We now have just 33 days left of Donald Trump's presidency, but who's counting? The president, he is still refusing to admit that he lost, and his enablers at Fox are right there by his side. I'm going to show you how the network is spreading misinformation, not just about the election, but also dangerous lies about COVID and the vaccines. Also, Dana Milbank from the Washington Post, he'll explain why he says if there was any fraud in the election, the source of it, a Republican senator by the name of Ron Johnson. We'll also check in on the Georgia Senate runoff and show you how excited voters are and explain why that could be a good sign for Democrats. We'll head down to Georgia for that. We'll also hear from an outgoing congressman whose final message to his colleagues is that D.C. not putting Americans first. In a few minutes, I'm going to play for you outgoing Congressman Joe Cunningham's message. Trust me, it's funny, but it's also sadly, painfully true. The D.C. dysfunction is predictable, but it is still stunning considering the abundance of pain in this country right now and the dwindling time to avert a financial cliff for tens of millions of Americans. But even by congressional standards, this farce has a lead actor unlike anything we've ever seen. Since November 3rd, our president has lied, threatened, and begged to keep his job. He has alternatively threatened a coup, tried to cajole or blackmail state lawmakers to steal him an election, winked at the Supreme Court to do him a solid and disenfranchise millions because, well, they owed him one. He's ginned up the lunatic fringe with conspiracies, and he's egged on violence from avowed racists. He has found lemmings in the dark corners of the web, conservative media, and in Crazy Town, USA, and he has found cowards in the halls of Congress. Democracy and decency, thank God, won the day, but it wasn't a rout. All of this, of course, is not happening in some vacuum. In the last 2 days, we have lost more than 7,000 Americans to COVID, and it is expected to get worse in the coming weeks and months. Yet not a single word of sympathy or empathy from my president. The vaccine has thankfully arrived, and our hero frontline medical workers and even officials are rolling up their sleeves to get their shot and publicly tell a skeptical America that it's safe and critical if we want to return to normal. Yet, my president couldn't even bother to come down the stairs of the White House or even tweet to pledge his support. In days, eviction protections will disappear for millions of Americans, and tonight, the government could actually be shut down. Desperately needed stimulus aid, it's just sitting in limbo, yet my president can't be bothered to turn off Fox News and to lift a finger. America, it's just suffered a cyber assault from the Russians, the equivalent experts describe of a modern-day Pearl Harbor. Yet my president doesn't channel FDR. Instead, he only tweeted about the fake Russia hoax. Now, I personally don't choose to venture into Donald Trump's psyche and question why he wants to remain president. Is it because he's petrified of the criminal and civil exposure that awaits him as a private citizen? Is it because his tender ego can't handle being confirmed being a giant loser? Is it because his narcissism will soon take him off the front pages and with it the constant attention that he so craves? Frankly, I don't care. I don't care why he's so desperate to cling to his soon-to-be former job. But I do care about those Americans who believe that he cares about them. So let me spare you the suspense. He doesn't, and he never did. As people die in numbers greater than a daily 9/11, and as our divided nation begs for a united message on the safety of vaccinations, my president is MIA. As people wonder if they can hang on any longer before they can't afford to put food on the table for their families or that they'll face an eviction notice, their president throws Twitter tantrums and he fixates on personal grievance. We can no longer live in this country without actual leadership or just someone who gives a damn about something other than himself. Really, enough already. In the meantime, Congress still can't manage to pass a COVID relief package, and if they fail to do so, just that, tonight, 12 million Americans could lose their jobless benefits. the day after Christmas. Wrap your arms around that. Millions more could be evicted as federal protections expire on New Year's Eve. Of course, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, they blame the Democrats, but the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, he's pointing fingers across the aisle.
I will note that had the Republican majority joined in negotiations any time in the last 6 months as we had requested, we would not be in the unfortunate position of negotiating against the government funding deadline.
The package on the table as we speak has a price tag of about $900 billion. In it, it has enhanced unemployment benefits, small business loans, money for vaccine distribution, stimulus checks for individuals that could be roughly about $600 to $700 each and more, but it is far from a done deal. Now, one thing I didn't mention, you may notice, was aid for the states. It doesn't matter whether they are red or blue, every state in our union sure needs a whole lot of green, and if they don't get it, vital services will be cut. Let me tell you what those things will be. Mass transit, gutted. Cops, firemen, teachers, really? They're going to lose their jobs? Public hospitals in a pandemic will lose funding, and the list, it goes on and on. Governor Cuomo of New York, he is one of many who are more than upset with D.C.
Some people in Washington say, well, bankrupt the states. Bankrupt the states. You want to bankrupt New York now? In the middle of this pandemic, when the numbers are spiking? When we're just about to start this ambitious vaccination program? Where I need hospitals and nurses and National Guard to do this unprecedented operation? Now is when you want to bankrupt New York? It is madness.
We're also dealing with a government shutdown because, well, why not, right? If Congress cannot pass a spending bill by midnight tonight, Mitch McConnell reportedly working on a short-term package to keep the lights on at least through the weekend, but they have less than 6 hours to make that happen. So, as they say, the clock is ticking. I want to bring in my first guest tonight, Congressman Ed Case. He is a Democrat from Hawaii. Yes, especially at this time of the calendar year, we're all envious of you, particularly the brutal weather on the East Coast, but we're not envious of what you're dealing with on the Hill. You know, there seems to be such a disconnect, Congressman, between the obvious need through no fault of their own that tens of millions of Americans are going through, and here we are towards the end of December now, and we can't get a stimulus package through, and now we're possibly looking at a government shutdown. What can you tell us about the state of negotiations right now?
Well, first of all, it's tragic that we haven't gotten a second emergency assistance package done by now. I don't think there could be a better example to the American people of dysfunction in your government. The House, we passed the HEROES Act in May. And so, you know, that's been on the table for months and months now. We saw the need for it at the time, and we all could not get it done earlier than this. Now, one could say that it was complicated by the election or by deep political and policy disagreements. But with that level of need across the country, you would think that we'd be able to pull this together a lot earlier than this. And in fact, what it took was a group that wasn't part of the leadership of either the House or the Senate to really put together some proposals that were reasonable and difficult compromises, but nonetheless compromises that would actually get the deal done. And that's where the negotiations stand right now. I think we're down to the final strokes of it. I certainly hope so. I believe so. But until I see the deal itself, I'm not going to say it's a done deal.
You know, Congressman, I'm sure you saw the reporting as well that apparently this week, President Trump was pushing to expand significantly checks going out to individuals here to even the tune of $2,000 reportedly, and was talked out of it by aides. Listen, the easiest thing to do in Washington is to spend money. In this particular case, you know, scope is critical. I don't get the opposition, particularly because we know it works. It worked with the first round of stimulus. Why are Republicans resisting making this a bigger package?
I don't know. I'm not in the heads of the folks that are resisting making this a bigger package. I'm one of the people that believe we need meaningful relief throughout our country. I certainly need it here in Hawaii, with one of the most severely economically impacted regions in our entire country. And so I don't understand the overall policy goal, I suppose, in their head of limiting emergency assistance. I guess I could understand, at least I don't agree with it, understand objections to further assistance to specific parts of the package. State and local government funding, I think, is essential, but I understand that some people may not agree with that. But I really don't understand the reluctance on the direct stimulus payments to Americans, which were a real godsend in the middle part of this year. And I think they're desperately needed today. And so I think it's really less about the stimulus payments themselves, where I think there is consensus in Congress to proceed with those stimulus payments. And it is more about the actual overall cost of that package.
And I'll go one better, state aid. I certainly don't have to educate you about the state you represent, but I'm speaking to governors from, by the way, red states too, as well as obviously from blue states. They are hemorrhaging money, and if this government doesn't come through with state aid, in the middle of a pandemic, we're going to be firing law enforcement and first responders and cutting aid to hospitals. It's the most insane thing I've ever heard of.
The National Governors Association, on a completely nonpartisan basis, has endorsed aid to state and local governments, further assistance to state and local governments. The National Conference of Mayors, on a completely nonpartisan basis. State and local governments know the acute dilemma that they face. You know, the apparent omission of further aid to state and local governments is going to be critical to those governments, and it's really going to hurt. For example, let's just take one concrete example from what I face right here in Hawaii. Again, one of the most severely economically impacted states in our entire country, and that is being felt in government funding, government financing. So support from our federal government for that is critical. And yet my governor is having to face furloughs right now because there just isn't the financing to maintain a full workforce in areas that are critical, for example, distribution of vaccine. Critical, for example, in the processing of unemployment claims, where we have one of the highest pro rata unemployment claim rates in the entire country. And so they're forced to these difficult choices that, frankly, they shouldn't have to be forced to. This is the time that the federal government is really the only place that is available for our country in all components, including our state and local governments, to get us through.
Again, I don't expect you to speak for others, but President-elect Biden has talked repeatedly about the need to work across the aisle here and to find a cooperation in a new Washington. He believes, it seems, that once the fever of Trump passes, that there'll be a new reality in Washington. But 2/3 of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, with 18 attorney generals, they supported that crazy Texas suit that would have disenfranchised more than 10 million Americans with no evidence whatsoever to support it. My question is, do they believe that? Or is this just something of a political, Potomac two-step they'll do for another few weeks until late January, and then reality will set in? What are we dealing with? You're closer to it than us at home. It doesn't make any sense what we're seeing, but is it something they believe in or something they're just doing for political expediency?
I think it falls into two camps. First of all, there's the camp of true believers. These are folks, I think in the minority, by the way, of the Republican caucus, who simply do believe in their hearts that there was widespread, massive fraud in the election, notwithstanding that 50 states on a bipartisan, nonpartisan basis certified the results, notwithstanding that there's virtually every single court case of 70 or 80 of them has been decided against the Trump campaign, and notwithstanding the clear popular vote margin and the Electoral College certification. Now, I think for the remainder of them, it's just a very, very difficult political calculation that if they don't fall in line with the orthodoxy that is coming out of the president, that they are going to be severely at risk in their own elections, in their own states, in their own constituencies from that part of their primary election constituencies that remain with the mindset of the president. And so I think that's really more the calculation than anything else. And yes, I am very much hoping that once the election clears and the inauguration occurs and we move into the 117th Congress, that we will actually see a set aside of all of that, and we'll get back to work, and we'll see whether we can, in fact, improve working across the aisle and finding those bipartisan solutions that President Biden certainly wants to find.
Well, I sure hope you're right. And in the holiday season, I'm going to hold out hope here, certainly for that overdue stimulus package, because as you know better than anybody, we and so many people desperately need it. But Congressman, best of luck and thank you for the time.
Thank you so much. Aloha.
All right, folks. Now, you heard a bit of optimism there from our guest, and I certainly hope he's right. But it's not just folks on Capitol Hill that are part of the problem. We're also seeing certain mediums and certain channels in particular that are making things go from bad to worse and, frankly, pushing some really dangerous things out there at a time we can't afford it. When we come back, how Fox News saying in President Trump's foxhole over the election, but doing something even more dangerous, like spreading misinformation about COVID and a vaccine. When we come back after the break, I'll show you exactly what I mean.